and then we'll get started. Okay. Good morning. That's me. I'll go through this quick because I have a lot of stuff to do. Okay, so just so that you all know how to use the chat box, on top of your screen you're going to see these icons. You want to depress the one that looks like a cartoon bubble, and you're going to get a box that looks like this. When that happens, you want to go to where it says type here, and you want to enter your name. Well, you want to type, and thank you. And then that'll do it. So why don't you put in your name and where you're from, and that'll show me that everybody knows how to do this. And then we'll get started. And I still have people coming in, so. Okay, so it looks like everybody figured out how to do this. I'm going to shut off PowerPoint because my computer runs best when I have the fewest things running. And we'll go into Excel, and we'll get started. Okay. And as always, if any of you have any questions, I am looking at the chat box. I'll absolutely respond to them. So let me start by asking a question. How many of you are familiar? And I'll try to keep the question simple because I know you're typing. How many of you are familiar with conditional formatting? Know what it is, have used it? Okay, good. Okay, good. All right. A little. So I'm going to start with conditional formatting and talk about not just what it can do, but how you can use it. But before I do that, I had a request just to quickly go over something that I didn't get to last time. And so I'm going to take about 5 minutes and just do that, which is table sorting, and then after that we'll go to conditional formatting. So what I have here is just a set of data. It actually happens to be data from a school district in Connecticut, and I just happen to have the data set. So they run a magnet school. So they draw students from the region, okay? And so this is just some data on the students, which town they come from, and which program they're in, okay? And I had a question, how do you sort this as a table? So the first thing you want to do, and it's best to do this, if you have tables, you want to make sure that your first row are labels, because otherwise it's a pain. So you want to make sure that your first row is labeled. So here I have student, town, program. Also, no blank spaces in my data set. And then you're going to highlight that, and you're going to go to Insert, and you're going to select Table. It's going to ask you, does the table have a header, which it does. Those were the labels. And then you're going to hit OK, and it's going to create your table. Now, what happens is once you have your table, then you have all kinds of sorting capabilities based on each one of these drop-down tabs. So let's suppose that I wanted to sort just alphabetically by towns. I could just sort them in ascending order, and now that's going to give this to me alphabetically by towns. Or what I could also do is say, well, maybe I only want to look at one of the towns or two of the towns. So I'm just selecting the first two, and that's then going to give me my table of just those towns. Now, of course, if anytime I want to reset that, I can go back to here, and you can tell which ones have a, I'll make it a little bigger so you can see. You can tell which ones have a sort, because notice this has the down triangle, and this has, I don't even know what you call that, but it's a different labeling that would show you that it's a sorted group. It's not the whole set. So again, I'm just going to pick a few more just so we have a data set, okay? That makes sense. So now this is these 4 towns, and maybe I just want to look at the students taking engineering. So I can now go here. I've already sorted it by town. I can now come in and sort it by engineering, and now I have all my engineering students. You know, by the way, if I had sorted it by gender and it was female, I would have had none in the data, okay? So that's pretty much table sorting. Now, just a little bit of advice. Usually the question I get after that is, well, how do you take it out of a table, okay? So that it's just a regular range after you've done this, okay? So a tip. A useful tip. If you're going to take it, if you already have it as a table, it usually puts a color in. And it's going to be a problem because that color is going to remain when you change it back to a range, and it's a pain to take them out. So my advice is, when you're in the table, and you have to be in the table to see this extra tab, go into the table and select, go to your very end, and select, you know, no colors before you sort it back out. And then at that point, all you need to do is, you can be anywhere in the table, okay? Go back to the table. Actually, if you're in it, it'll usually remember where you are, but let's assume you were on the home. You want to go to click table, and then simply hit convert to row, to range. And then it's going to switch it back to its normal range, okay? And now it's not a table anymore. Now, I will tell you this. I'm going to put it back in the table for a minute just to make an important point before we move on. And I took a little bit more than 5 minutes, but if I have my data set into tables, and and again, I'm going to follow my own rule and get rid of the color. And let's say I sort it by, I only want to look at aviation. If I change it back to a range, it's going to take out the sort. So what you need to do, if you want the data as a, you know, sorted, is you need to copy it as a sorted data set, bring it down somewhere else, and then when you do the paste special and paste values. That will then change it into a range, and it'll have just the sorted data. Okay, I'm just going to stop. Any quick questions on that? Everybody good with that? Okay. And in fact, you don't even have to convert it to a range. If you change it to values, that'll automatically make it a range. Okay. So let's go on and look at conditional formatting. My first data set, probably it's not a financial one, but it seems to be a pretty easy one to see, is just some student test scores. Actually, if I can take a moment before I even do any Excel-ish stuff, is to talk about the value of conditional formatting. You know, we tend to think of Excel as a computational tool, but it's also a presentation tool. And also, sorting data, by visually can often help you spot important information. So if I have a data set and I want to look at my 3 highest checks, it may be easier to do that without having to turn around and sort the data set, simply by having the 3 highest checks show up as a different color. Okay? So it isn't just about presentation. It could actually alert you to problems. Okay? So we're going to start here, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to highlight the data set. And then I'm going to go to conditional formatting, which is on the home ribbon. And you're going to see there's a whole bunch of rules. We're going to start by looking at greater than, less than rules. Okay? So I'm going to say something now. It's not going to make any sense this moment, but it will once I start to do it. If you're going to rearrange a data set, greater than and less than really going to end up being about the same. Which one you do is up to you. But if you do greater than, you want to start with your lowest band, okay? If you're doing less than, you want to start with your highest band. Now, I know that makes no sense yet. It will in a minute because of the way they overwrite. So what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to click greater than. And this is obviously test scores. I'm actually going to enter it decimally, but same thing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say everything that's greater than 70. Is now going to be highlighted. So now I have 2 bands for my data. I have the data of 70 and below, and I have the data of 70 of above 70. Now what I can do is come back here again to the same data set, again do greater than, and pick a different amount, say higher than 85. And you can do, by the way, greater than or equal to also. I just happen to pick greater than. What you want to do is select a different color scheme, though. Otherwise, you're not going to see anything. And now I have 3 bands for my data. Okay, I have it below 70, 70 to 85, and 85 and above. And I can come back actually and do it again and pick one more. Again, do greater than, because they overwrite, and do anything above 90 and pick yet another color scheme. And now I have my data sorted by bands, okay? And that again gives me a good visual picture of my data. Any questions so far? All right. Now, how many of you are familiar with this? Working with multiple bands. I just want to make sure you're with me. Okay. Okay, so now one of the questions comes up. What happens if the data is not, it's not numerical? And I'm not going to do these because it takes too long. Okay, I already did it. But one of the options, and I can just do it even here so you can see it. Under conditional formatting, you can do equal to. And you can say anything that's equal to A is now going to be highlighted in red. So you'd have to do, if you're going to do A, B, C, D, you'd have to do a band or a color scheme for each one of the letters. By the way, it's not case sensitive, either in when you enter it or when you do it, if you're going to use text. Okay? So so you can certainly do text. You could do word, paid, unpaid. You could do letter grades, etc. Okay, so if you wanted to clear it, and I don't actually want to do that yet, I'm going to do it in a minute, you can clear it. If you want to see your rules, you can go to Manage Rules, and they're all there, and you actually can edit them. So I can go back and edit a rule. say, change this to 0.95 and edit a rule. Okay? So a lot of times I used to wipe them out, but you can. All right? Now, what's interesting is they're not dependent on the data. So if I eliminate my data, or I change a data set, that'll be reflected in the color. So if I had this pre-set up, and now I enter my new data for the year, or my new information, it's going to be, the conditional formatting is going to be reflected. Now, I will tell you, if you copy a piece of information in, so if you did 96% and you copied it in, I'm actually not going to do it. Okay, well, I could. That's going to wipe out your conditional formatting. It's gone. However, there is a way that you can do it so it does not wipe it out. And actually, I can put it back just by doing this. Okay. So the way you can copy it, you have to copy. When you go to paste special, go to the bottom, and select all merge conditional formats. If you do your copying and you click that, the conditional formatting will remain. Okay? So just something to bear in mind. What it didn't remain was the laying out. Okay? But so it is possible, if you had this preset up, that you could then at that point copy the data in. But just make sure you do the copy special, or you're going to overwrite your conditional format. Any questions so far? Everybody good? It's not really hard, okay, to do. Now, you saw there were some pre-written bands, but if you looked again, you'd see you can really customize them to anything you want here, okay? So let's look at some other conditional formatting options with the same data set before I move on to some other data sets. So in this case, I am going to clear it. So in addition, I can also do top-bottom rules. Now, it says 10, but it doesn't have to be 10. It just gives you the 10 as the default. So it could be my top 5, my top 3. So here, again, I'm just going to change it to top 4. And now it's going to give me the top 4 scores. Now notice, I did it for the whole table, but maybe I really want to know the top scores for each test. And I'm not going to do all of them, okay? So let's just say I did top 3 scores. Then I would have the top 3 scores for test 1. Okay? Questions? Okay. And then I could, in turn, do the same thing for the other ones. Actually, I'll do one more. Now, you can also do it by percents. And by the way, even though they chose the rules as different rules, you actually can do this with any one of them simply by whether you click percent or not. But I'm going to kind of stick to doing it officially. So here it's, let's say I want to look at my top 10% of my data. which is going to give me a different answer than my top 10. Okay? Questions? Now, there are all these, crazy ones that I personally would never use. But I'll just show you a couple of them. This is an interesting one. Little data bars. Okay. Kind of like, your cell phone reception. And there are a lot of others. I could spend a whole hour on this. You'll find them. Okay? All right. So I want to take this to a little more advanced level and look at some other examples. All right? So again, where it might be useful, this is a very small data set, but if I wanted to look at use of electricity and I wanted to know what were my, two highest sites for electricity use in January, I could do that. Or I could say, show me colored all the checks over $5,000, okay? So it can be helpful for analysis, kind of eyeball analysis. Let me show you another use. Let's assume that we have a per diem, and this one I didn't set up yet, so I'm going to do them, okay? We have a per diem in our district of $35 for meal reimbursements. And it's not an absolute rule, but, I want to be able to spot anybody that put in a request over 35. So I'll just go, and this is just a greater than rule, and just do 35. And by the way, you can copy down conditional formatting. Okay, and now 35, fine. 36 shows up in red. 30 doesn't. 38 shows up in red. Okay? So here we have an ability to spot anything that would be over the per diem, where we might then say the person, you need to provide, an explanation as to why. Okay, so my next one is more complex. Actually, you know what? I'm going to skip it for a minute. I am going to go back to it. And the only reason I'm skipping it for a minute is it involves something we haven't learned yet, which is VLOOKUP. So I'll ask you to accept what I tell you with the VLOOKUP, and then when we do our session on VLOOKUP, you'll learn how to fill in the blank. But this next one doesn't require VLOOKUP, so I feel confident about this one, okay? So as you know, a lot of the things that we do are we're trying to compare budget to actual, okay? Oh, yeah, absolutely. In fact, I've been pushing it out to, I've created a playlist, and I've been pushing it out to Stacy. She should be able to make it available to you. Yeah, because in 6 months from now, when you go to do this, you're not going to remember the details. So, yeah, it's helpful. I even sometimes look at my old ones myself. Okay, but let's just look at an example here, because I think this is an interesting one. Okay, so the way I set this up, and I'll explain everything, because this involves doing a customized conditional formatting. And one of the options, if you go under conditional formatting, is more rules, and you can do an actual customized rule, okay? So I just want to show you what that is, okay? So what I did here was, and I'll just lay it out so you can see it. Just so you can visually see it. So what I want to know is These are my current contracts. These are new bids that I've just gotten in. And I want to be able to look at all the bids that exceed CPI. So I've just made up a CPI number, okay? And I said, okay, if it's under CPI, I'm not going to argue about it. If it's over, I'm going to begin to talk about whether, we want to look at, another contractor. But I want to be able to spot those, okay? So I have a basic formula here. It's just a basic logical operator. It says if D41, which is this, is greater than the current contract plus CPI, then give me a true. Because in logical operators, you get either a true or a false, okay? And then what I want to do is actually put this logical operator into my conditional formatting. So what I would do is go to conditional formatting, go to more rules, actually, and then I just went blank as to where you find it. Okay, maybe it's actually under here. New rule. Let's look at new rule. Nope, that's not it. Pardon me, I had a brain fry for a second. I know there's a way to do oh wait, it's here. Okay, use a formula. And then you can enter a formula. Now, I will tell you, if you're going to do this, don't do it as a range, because you will not be able to copy them down. It's just a little bit of a problem with this when you want to copy it down. So what you want to do is, and it's not a bad idea to check them here, okay? You don't absolutely have to create them here, but it's not a bad idea. Okay, is you create it here, and then you're going to copy it into the conditional formatting. And I had done it already, so. It's because I have the copying on. Okay. Actually, I think you can do it under greater then, and then copy the formula in. Now that will work. If you then do that, then you can copy them down. All right? But now what happens is it took the amounts. You should actually copy it down blank, but I'll give you an example. So if I now do $7,000, if it's 62, it's fine. Got it? Actually, 61. It's over CPI. Okay? Everybody get the idea? Questions? So I know it's a little complicated, but one of the things that helps is to put your formula here. And then at that point, copy it in. And you'll notice, because the CPI was a data set, I put in absolute reference. And so it'll go, as it goes down, it'll adjust this to 42, 43, but that's remaining I-40. Okay, so it's possible to have it based on a customized formula. Let me just show you another one, same basic idea. So here, instead of CPI, it's the cap. Let's say the cap is 3%. So at that point, if any contract exceeds, is over 3% greater, let me spot it. Okay? And again, because you can do multiple bands, I can have 3% greater, 5% greater. Questions? Everybody good? Did I make your head explode? All right. Okay, good. I'm glad. All right, so let me just show you one more. And then we'll move on and we'll do some logical operators. Okay, so this next one is kind of complicated, but it's something actually I saw in a district recently. So they have different per diems based on what state you were in, because the contract is we go by whatever the state rate is in the state that the event took place. So if someone goes to a conference in New Jersey, it's the New Jersey rate. And if it's in Maryland, it's the Maryland rate, okay? So in order to be able to do this, I created just a lookup table. And again, I'm not going to go over this in detail because I'm going to go over a session on that. So I'm just going to ask you to trust me on how it works for now. But basically, I'll just show you what it looks like. So here's my lookup table, which is different rates for different states. Depending on what state I pick, it's going to give me a different rate. And now I have my conditional formatting can be set to that. So this is the same data set again. That was just for that. So here's an example. The PA rate is 33. So if I have 35 and it's Pennsylvania, that, that's going to be red. On the other hand, if it was New York, it would not. Okay? So it's actually, I'm able to make it smart enough that it can actually adapt based on the state rates. Now, another example where you might use this in the school district is if you had different contracts, where each contract had different provisions, say, on, what people could, how much life insurance people could purchase, where if you're in the administrator's contract, you can purchase 10% of your salary. If you're in the teacher's 12 times your salary, whatever, and we can actually have a conditional formatting that's sophisticated enough that it can accommodate the difference, okay? I know it's a little complex, but it shows you that you got a lot of room here to make it a really, sophisticated conditional formatting. All right, any questions? Did that make your head explode yet? Not yet? All right. Now, 90% of what people do with conditional formatting is a lot simpler than this, but I think something like this has some real value. When you're just trying to eyeball which, and maybe even browbeat a little on contracts, how come you're over CPI? I got a question why it went up by so much. Okay? And it could certainly be done with budget to actual as well. All right. So I'm going to go on beyond conditional formatting, and let's talk about logical operators. We have about 20 minutes left. That should be enough time for me to cover everything, give or take. Okay. All right, so basic logical operator is a logic statement. And I didn't give you all of them. There are actually more. There's nor. But the basic ones are, greater than, less than, greater than, equal to, and, or. And they will normally return a true or false, depending on whether the condition is met. So if I go 25 is greater than 30, that's false, okay? If I had typed 25 is greater than 20, that's true. So those true or false become the basis for how logical operators work, okay? So I will just give you an example of a logical operator here, okay, and then why it's not all that great. Okay, and why we need to use if statements. Okay, so here we have a question of who can vote. So the voting age is 18, okay? So my logical operator is, is your age, actually it should be greater than or, well, I did it, greater than or equal to 18. If you're at 18, you can vote, okay? So what happens here is it returns true or false. Here it's 17, but we're 18 or 27, 16, you can't vote, okay? The problem is it only returns true or false, and that may not always be, the best way to present the information. So one of the alternatives to that is to use an if statement. So an if statement kind of works like true and false, but it gives you options on what you're actually going to see. So in an if statement, you have that same logical test, but then it says, okay, if the answer is true, give me this result. If the answer is false, give me that result. Okay? So it's the basic same logical test. It just gives you choices on what you're going to see. So let me show you it as an if statement. So it's the basic same logical test. It says if it's true, you can vote. If it's false, you cannot vote. So instead of showing true or false, it's going to show something that's a little more visually logical to someone looking at it. Okay, we good so far? And again, just another simple example of this. Doesn't have to be in double quotes. I believe your text answers do, but I'm not 100% sure on that. I'm always that's one of those things I'm not sure about. Actually, you don't need them. Doesn't matter. You can have them. You can not have. Oh no, you see, you do need it. I think you do need the double quotes whenever you have a text response. But don't quote me on the double quotes. I'll check on it and follow up next time. Okay, so here again we have just, actually, did I put them in here? Yeah, I did put them here. Okay, so we have yes and no. I know you don't need them with numbers. Okay? So here we have a little bit of so that's a basic if statement. Now, it's also possible to nest if statements, put an if statement inside an if statement. So here we have a question, is someone part-time, full-time, or hourly? Okay? And so what it does is it does the first test, and if it's true, it returns that result. If not, it adds another if statement. Okay? So here I've just laid it out so you can see what it says. It says if I9, which is this, I-19, I9, I wrote it, I-19, I don't know, I just wrote it wrong, is a 1, give me part-time. If it's not, do the test again. If it's 2, give me full-time. And then I actually don't need the third one because anything else, if it's even blank, will give me hourly. So again, let's look at what happens. You do a 1, you do a 2, you do a 3. And actually, it worked. Okay, 1, 2, 3. By the way, it gets a little tricky with how many closed parentheses, so I'll give you a little trick just to remember. If you count your if statements, there's 1 if, 2 ifs, you should have 2 parentheses, okay? Because that's the most common error. Now, the problem with this is if you have blank, nothing, or you have, it's still going to give you hourly, even though nothing was returned. So it might be a good idea as a result to actually do 3 if statements and have one of them be a not applicable. Okay? Everybody okay with that? Now you can also apply, conditional formatting to this, but I'm not going to do that. Okay? All right, so let's look at a use of this. Okay, so here we have I did two nests, I believe, here. And I just threw down a drop-down menu to make life simple. Okay, so here's what we have. All right? So each one of my bargaining units has a different rate of, say, contribution for medical. Okay? So depending on which one I pick, it's going to return that item. Now I'm going to show you what's actually in the box. It says if C46 is admin, give me a 6. If it's C46 is teachers, give me a 4, and anything else, give me 07. So when it gets to classified, there's actually no classified category. It's just doing that because it isn't any of the others. And I would recommend actually doing an additional nest, where you have a nest for classified, and then have it be blank if nothing is selected. And that's why here you see a 7, here you see nothing when nothing is selected. Okay? Am I going too fast? Everybody with me? So, I want to tell you, I hate nested if statements. Not that I never use them, but I actually don't like them. I went into a district not too long ago, one actually in Suffolk, and they had a problem involving longevity, and I never saw a crazier if statement of and it's lower than or greater than. I mean, it took me like forever to debug this thing. And I'll let you in on a little secret. You can replace nested if statements with a VLOOKUP. And so in almost every case when I come in and I look at these crazy if statements, I'm pretty much changing them to a VLOOKUP. Now, I might not do it for something as simple as this, although even here I would prefer a VLOOKUP. But generally, it was a while to debug it. Generally, it's better to move away from nested if statements and to move towards using VLOOKUP for a lot of reasons. One of them being that if you're working off a lookup table and then you have a change in the rates, it's an easy thing to fix your table. If it's embedded in, it could be a nightmare, even though you could do cell references within the if statements as well. But generally, I try to stay away from them. And when we do VLOOKUP, I'll certainly give you an example of it. Here's just one more. I got to remember what I did here. Oh, yeah. Okay. So this is, and I just put in a color, a little conditional formatting to mix them up. But I'm going to go actually to show you what's here. So here I have an if statement. It says if it's due, if the amount is due, give me today's date minus the number of days of the transaction. And again, I'll go over this another time as well. If not, give me a blank. And I love these because as soon as the item is, actually this would have been better if I did this. So this is how much is currently outstanding, right? But as soon as any item is paid, it comes off the outstanding list. And that's done through an if statement. All right? So that's kind of a nice use of an if statement, and it's not a nested one, so that makes sense to do. Okay. Would you like to see and I pretty much have covered everything I absolutely have to cover. What I'd like to show you is a really cool use of if statements. And in fact, not a nested one, a simple if statement, okay? And something I've been doing for years. Okay. All right, so I can date myself a little bit here. And even though I don't work as an accountant anymore, I started out as an accountant on paper, doing analysis paper for this kind of work, where I had to spread data across columns. Okay, and people still do this. So what I have here, and by the way, this is the way I actually do my own records for my business, rather than using QuickBook. Okay, exactly. You got it. Okay, I don't even know if you can buy it anymore. Probably could. Okay, but anyway, so what I have here is a check register or a cash disbursements journal based on checks paid. Okay, and one of the challenges is spreading to the columns. So here I have the amount, and here are my columns. Obviously, there's only 5 here. Usually they're much larger than that, and then description. Okay, so, a lot of people, if you don't know how to do this, you're gonna take the amount and you're gonna copy it to the appropriate column. But that worries me, because the potential to end up copying it into the wrong place is very high. Okay? It's so easy to just move it over to the wrong column. So what I'm going to do is show you how you can use if statements to do this. Okay? So I'm going to start by showing you rent, the first one. Actually, let me just put the code in so you'll see it. So what I have is a very simple if statement. It says if D4, which is my code column, is a 1, give me the value. If not, leave it blank. So as long as that's a 1, I just messed up my formula here, but as long as that's a 1, it's going to return the amount. Now in this next column, it's exactly the same thing, except it's a 2. So it's basically the same logical test, except it's a 2. Lo and behold, in my third column, it's a 3. Okay? In my fourth column, it's a 4. It's the exact same formula. It's just saying, if it's a 4, give me the amount, otherwise leave it blank. And here again, if it's the last one, it's a 5. So what I'll normally do when I'm creating this is I'll do the 1. I'll make sure that I, lock down the column, so as I copy over, I'm not going to lose my column. And then at that point, I just change it. So I copy it all across the way. It'll all say 100. I'll just do one of them to show you what I mean. That's now 100, and I just go back in and change that to a 2. And then I test my row. And it's easy to test the row. I'll let you see it. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Now I know it works. Once I know it works, then I copy that all the way down. Now I've got it all set up. Now, by the way, the one I use, I have it all set up already. Okay, and now it spreads to the appropriate column. So if this is an item as 2, it's going to put it in 4 questions. How many of you have seen this before? How many of you are alive with me? I know Dan's with me. I think everybody else went to sleep. Okay. Okay. All right, you have seen this before. Now, of course, there's only one thing I don't like about this. Or I can even make it better. Why do I have to have codes? Why don't I just put in the names? Because I can do a drop-down menu, right? So here's the very same thing down below, but now instead of having, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I actually have what? Rent, utilities. And so if I simply select rent, it's going to go and it's going to put it in the rent column. This is a little harder when you're typing it, the actual ifs, because instead of having, I'll make it bigger so you see, instead of having a number, I have to put rent in. And these should be with quotes. Okay? And here, utilities, here, office supplies, office supplies, etc., etc., etc. And then I do the exact same thing. I debug it by taking it through all of the options. I make sure that my top row works, and then I copy it down. Utilities, office supplies, temporary help, insurance, and then once I have it set up, then if I start a new year, I just wipe out my data, not my if statements, but just my basic data, and I start again. And so this is actually how I do my cash disbursements for my business. I should do it every month. I tend to wait, so it's more work, but basically that's how it works, okay? So if you have to spread any data across columns, the use of an if statement for that, this is a really good use, okay? And again, just another example of how you might do this. Here we have, we want to spread amounts. Are they part-time, full-time, or hourly employees? And again, full-time goes here, part-time it goes here, and it's going to spread the amounts, okay? Hourly it goes, just locked up. Hourly. Yes, I will. I've been sending it to Stacy, and I think she pushes it out. I actually created a playlist in YouTube, and I'll make sure to send her when I upload this. I'll send her a link to the playlist, and then once you have it, as each new one comes, I'll just add it to the playlist. Okay? All right. I think we're about to wrap up. Any questions? Anything you want me to go over again? I think I've covered pretty much everything. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't have all your individual email addresses. Stacy does. She's the one that sent you the link. I will send it to her. Okay? And then at that point, you'll have the YouTube link. If you don't get it, email me. Okay? I'm just going to stop. Any questions? Did you learn anything new? I hope. Yeah. Okay. Good enough. We actually managed to get done on time. Good. So we'll see you next time, next month.